The Fast and the Furious start with a thrilling nighttime highway robbery. A team of skilled thieves driving black Honda Civics expertly hijack a semi-truck filled with valuable electronic goods. The next scene shifts to Brian O'Connor, who is seen test driving a modified Mitsubishi Eclipse on a deserted track. Following his trial run, he visits Toretto's market and cafe. While his food is being prepared, he spots Dominic Toretto in the back. As Brian eats his lunch, a team of import street racers arrive at the shop. They are all friends of Dominic and Mia's, the shop's proprietors. Vince gets suspicious that Brian is still coming around the store and he approaches him. It leads to a fight. Dominic is forced to break it up. He warns Brian not to come around the store again. Brian returns to his job at a local performance parts store, the Racer's Edge, where he also rents a room in the back. He tells his boss, Harry, that he needs a nitrous system for his Eclipse and that he'll need it installed by that night. After sunset, a large group of street racers gather for an illegal street race. Dom and his crew also show up. Dominic organizes a race with $2,000 buy-in. Brian doesn't have cash, but he puts his car on the table and the rest let him participate. After a rough start, Brian begins to catch up with others using his nitro system. Near the end of the race, he takes over Dominic, but turns out he has his own nitro, and when he engages it, he takes back the lead and wins the race. Soon, LAPD is alerted and goes after the racers. Dominic tries to stash his RX-7 in a nearby parking garage and attempts to escape on foot. However, an LAPD recognizes him and he almost gets arrested, but Brian shows up, takes him into his car, and manages to escape the police, though his car suffers a lot of damage. Soon after, a group of bikers appear and their leader, Johnny Tran, tells Brian and Dom to follow them to the Little Saigon, which is Tran's territory. Tran is mad that Dominic had disregarded their truce to stay off each other's turf. Dom explains that Brian, his new mechanic, got lost. Tran's crew opens fire towards Brian's car and blows it up as an act of revenge. Brian and Dominic share a taxi back to Dominic's house where an after-party is going on. He invites Brian to join it. Brian is not well received by Dominic's team, with Vince asking Dom why he brought the Buster to the party, and Dominic replying that it was the Buster that kept him out of handcuffs. Dominic leaves upstairs with his girlfriend Letty, and tensions mount when Brian is left alone with Vince, Leon, and Jesse. However, Mia interrupts and pulls Brian away from the trio to join her for a drink in the kitchen. She points out to Brian that her brother Dominic likes him and that it is unusual. The following day, Brian is pulled over by an unmarked police car and gets arrested. The car arrives at a residence where Brian is removed from the handcuffs. It turns out he is an undercover police officer led by Sergeant Tanner and FBI agent Bilkins. He is running an investigation on the recent truck hijackings, and his mission is to infiltrate the Street Racers Society. Brian returns to Dominic's shop bringing a Toyota Supra. Dominic and his team laugh at the car, failing to recognize its potential until Dominic pops the hood and notices that most of the parts under the hood are in good shape. Brian, Dominic, and his team begin restoring the vehicle and preparing it for Race Wars, a large-scale legal street racing event where Dominic expects Brian to repay the debt. In the meantime, Brian and Mia form a closer bond, and Mia asks Brian out to upset Vince, who is also into her. Dom shows Brian his Dodge Challenger and tells the story how his father used to drive it, until he died in a racing accident caused by the other driver. Dom reveals he beat up that driver and got banned from race trucks. Brian and Mia go out on their date and it goes perfect, until Sergeant Tanner contacts Brian by phone to inform him that the truck hijackers had struck again. Bilkins had made a decision to strike on Johnny Tran and his crew, as they are the most obvious suspects. The next day, the LAPD and FBI simultaneously arrest Tran, Lance, and the rest of his crew. But soon, it turns out that all the electronic equipment they possess was purchased legally. That leaves the investigators with the conclusion it must be Dominic and his crew who are responsible for the hijacks. When Brian arrives at Racewars, he finds Jesse about to race Tran for pink slips. Despite Jesse's Volkswagen Jetta being no match for Tran's Honda S2000, Jesse engages Tran anyway, but his lack of experience cost him a victory. Shocked after what happened, Jesse promptly departs from Racewars. Angry Tran goes to Dominic and claims his car, showing aggression. Dominic denies the provocation initially, until Tran informs him about the police raid, and then accuses him of being the snitch that caused it. Dominic rages and beats him badly. Later, Brian spots Mia arguing with Dom. When he leaves, Brian reveals to her that he is a cop and that Dominic and the team could be in trouble P. Brian and Mia leave Racewars in his Supra in pursuit of the team. Brian calls a police operator identifying himself as an officer and asks for assistance tracing Dominic's cell phone in hopes of intercepting them before they hijack another truck. The crew performs another hijacking, but turns out the drivers are armed with guns and they fight back. Vince immediately gets in trouble and things begin to look bad until Brian arrives with Mia and saves Vince's life, risking his own. Since Vince is badly wounded, Brian blows his cover in Dominic's presence by calling for an ambulance to save his life. Dominic is enraged. He returns to the car with Mia and the four depart back to the city as the paramedics load Vince into a helicopter. Brian returns soon after to confront Dominic. They begin to argue. Tran and his crew perform a drive-by on Dom's house, and it turns out Jesse gets hit and dies. Brian and Dom try to go after Tran. During the heist, Brian gets in trouble, but Dom saves him as he is about to get shot by one of Tran's bikers. Brian pursues Tran until they reach an overpass where Brian swings his car around and opens fire on Tran, striking him twice in the left side of the rib, causing him to crash and killing him. As Brian checks Tran's body, he spots Dominic and begins to chase him. Dom waits for him at a red light. As Brian pulls up, Dominic tells Brian that he used to race at the spot during high school and that the railroad crossing ahead of them marks a quarter-mile distance. Light turns green and they begin the duel, and soon it turns out that the train is also approaching the crossing. Dom crashes his car but survives. Instead of arresting Dom, Brian gives him the keys to his car, allowing Dom to escape the police. Following the end credits, Dominic is shown in Baja, Mexico, driving a 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS, repeating the famous line from earlier in the movie. "I live my life a quarter mile at a time. For those 10 seconds or less, I'm free." Dominic then drives into the sunset.